to him. He has a lot of accolades, but mostly, from what I'm picking up from the conversation, is a lifetime learner, grower, and willing to chase new adventures. How you doing, David?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to our conversation and to touching base with your listeners.
Well, we were just talking right before we got on here about like you worked in this field for about 50 years and you closed your practice several years ago. How has that been for you?
Well, I'm going to be 85 in April. I closed my practice when I was 82, and I did it for a specific reason. I not because I was no longer interested in the field, not because I thought I couldn't uh, do as well as I used to do. As a matter of fact, I thought I was practicing better than ever. But in my field, the field of psychiatry and psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, you work by yourself. And there's no one to tell you, unlike, let's say, being in a law office, hey, David, you're forgetting things, or you don't seem as focused, or your memory is slipping. And so you can do this privately and you can begin to slip, or you can keep practicing and you can die suddenly and strand your patients, or you can try to practice when you've got a serious illness and you can't really attend to the patient because you're so worried about your own malignancy or cardiac failure. And so I stopped because I didn't want to do that to my patients. Um, I actually thought it was unethical to keep practicing until, as I said, one of those three things happened, and so I stopped. And it was a very painful choice because I loved doing clinical work and thought I was still good at it. I didn't retire my mind. I still teach and I supervise, and and I write and I talk. But I decided I just was going to stop practice before I began to get what I call the dwindles. And but I had to. It was painful. It was painful to stop. It was painful to say goodbye to my patients. Um, and I miss the work that's a very stimulating, growth promoting, challenging profession. And I miss it, and there's no replacement for it. You can do other things, but you can't replace it.
When you obviously you can't replace the work that you were able to do, but as a teacher, how long have you been a teacher for?
I've been a teacher since 1971. So, what is that? That gets to be 55, 56 years.
And as a teacher, what was some of the most meaningful things that you've been able to do with students and helping them grow?
Well, I've taught two kinds of students. I've taught medical students, um, and I've taught people in training to be mental health workers, whether they're psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, social workers. And so, in teaching, in teaching all of them, what I've tried to emphasize as I look back on it is that the most essential aspect in a health profession, and I use all the health professions, including nursing and social work, even the health profession of being an orderly in a hospital, is the relationship with the patient is the foundation on which everything else builds. Um, unless unless obviously if you're a pathologist, there's no relationship, and if you're a radiologist, there probably is no. The relationship is very minor, but every other healthcare worker, the healing starts with the relationship with the patient. And I think that's been the most important thing I've tried to convey to my students at all levels. Um, if I'm working with an experienced psychiatrist or psychotherapist, there'll be a different kind of teaching. But even people who have been in practice a long time, they devalue and underestimate the importance of their relationship with their patient.
The one of the things that they've been really teaching and harping on when in my college, my university, is that the relationship is with the patient. It's about connecting with the patient, making sure that the patient is the expert in their own life. Is that something that you learned while you were in school, or is that something that you also developed through the time that you did this as a profession?
Well, I certainly learned it. Sorry for the pings. I don't know how to turn it off, but those are somebody sending me texts, maybe at any rate. Um, it's something I've learned. I learned in medical school, um, but it's the field of medicine and healthcare in general has changed so dramatically that in my opinion, it's changed in very destructive ways. The increased knowledge we have, the increased technology is staggering, but it's come at a cost. And healthcare, in my opinion, has become so commercialized and so much of a business model where nobody wants to pay you for their time, for your time. They'll be glad to pay you to take out their appendix or to do a bypass surgery or to do a root canal. But to sit down and talk with you when your child has died or is seriously sick or any other thing that's really stressful, they don't pay you. There's no, quote, no money in it. And so I think that medicine and healthcare has become increasingly commercialized and deprofessionalized and depersonalized. And I think healthcare in general is the worst because of it.
Do you think anything has to deal with the society that we live in, with the instant gratification and the disconnection of the human experience?
Well, that's a really challenging question, which I want to think about for a second. But actually, in some ways, the instant gratification makes it harder to establish this kind of personal relationship with your caregiver of any kind. But ironically, as I think about it now, which is a little differently from how I've thought about it before, I think people are hungry for the kind of thing you and I are talking about now. And I don't think they realize it because they're so used to instant gratification and quickly moving from one to another, or their text messages as my phone pings and stuff goes back and forth. And it feels very substantive and meaningful, but it doesn't have the depth, and the relationship doesn't isn't as deeply rooted. Um, so I think people are actually hungry for the kind of thing you and I are talking about now.
One of the challenges I've seen with people is they don't know how to accept what we were talking about. They want it, but they don't know how to embrace it.
I think about it a little differently. I agree with you. That's how many people feel. They want it, but they don't know how to embrace it. You're talking to a psychoanalyst now, and when I say that, you're talking to someone who believes it's what we're not aware of that's very important, not necessarily the most important, and not necessarily deeply buried hidden traumas, although that may be. So someone who says that they don't know how to may be hiding from themselves that something within them says, I don't want to. I'll feel
Hmm.
too ashamed. I'll feel too vulnerable. I'll feel like a failure. My wife will think I'm weak. Somebody in my position shouldn't need that. So there's all these, and there could be, you and I could come up with a long list of reasons that aren't in the foremost of consciousness, foremost awareness. And they'll just say, I don't know how to. But then if you sit down and talk with them, you'll say, well, I know how to, but. And almost everybody who comes to see a therapist, they've put it off for a long time. And it's very rare that somebody says, my father dropped dead yesterday and I've got to talk to somebody. That's very unusual. Usually someone has thought about seeing a therapist for a long time, and then something minor happens. The boss yells at them, and then they come in a panic. But that's the straw that broke the camel's back. So I think that the sense of vulnerability that comes with saying, I want and need to talk to someone and need some help, I think that's the biggest interference.
You mentioned shame. I also hear rejection. Do you think it's based off of how the humans we grew up and we worried about being rejected from the tribe? I've wondered this sometimes myself.
The answer is yes. Although, at least and I'm no expert on anthropology, it's both, and I think this is true for humans. Whether it's true for other animals, I don't know. But for humans, and all of us, if the tribe is the family, that we grow up wanting to stay deeply connected and in the family, but we also want to be autonomous individuals, and we want to stretch that connection, and have it be not as in have the intensity be different. It's not that it's not as intense, and it's not that it's not as meaningful. It takes on a different kind of intensity and meaning as we grow up. And so I think the conflict between wanting to stay deeply attached and immersed in the family and wanting to be autonomous, I think that's a conflict about being human, unlike my dog who may come in to visit as we talk. Um, he just wants to be connected. Right?
So, just out of curiosity, in your perspective, do you think it's the lack of the ability to set healthy boundaries and reinforce healthy boundaries that we create these barriers and obstacles to be able to have a true connection? Where if we were able to, and this is just my belief, where we are imposing our own self rejection on somebody. So the fear and shame creates this barrier.
Well, I want to make sure I understand what you mean, that we impose, that we feel ashamed of ourselves, and therefore, when we go to develop a relationship with someone else and we want to know whether we're going to let them really know us, that we don't want to make ourselves vulnerable because of our own sense of shame, and we're liable to, in some ways, attribute that to the other person.
Yes. And also create that another form of rejection.
Yes, I think that the fear of rejection is something that every human lives with. Um, I think it's, and you grow up with just human development. Your mother is around, and then your mother is not around. She may be cooking dinner, and you're in your, and you're doing what you're doing. So the sense of attachment and loss and presence and absence in the way we experience it, that's always a conflict. And yes, I think if one feels ashamed of oneself, the vulnerability in letting somebody really be close to you and you're getting close to them, that the greater the sense, I don't want them to know that about me, or they would reject me or think less of me, the greater it is and the greater the challenge.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit. And when I think about vulnerability and shame and rejection, I think about it also. And where I started this podcast is trying to reduce suicide. And men are completing about 4 times their female counterparts. And I have this belief, and I'm always willing to be corrected in changing my narrative. But the ability to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to be able to connect to a person, creates this obstacles and goes down a dark road. So, what is your beliefs on how connection and suicide, how they tie together?
Well, I mean, that's a hugely important question. And I know men commit suicide at a much higher rate than women. I would start, and this is my personal view, for your listeners, my profession of psychiatrist and psychoanalyst is more personal in terms of the essence of being a psychiatrist than being another kind of physician, for example. So these are very much my personal views based on my knowledge, but also based on the person I am to the degree you can distinguish them. I start with the premise that suicide is always in the person's view, the best solution to a problem. It's not a failure. It is a miserable beyond words. I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Either I've tried help to be helped and people haven't been able to help me, or medication hasn't been able to help me, or I have my own internal struggles that have been so powerful that I've chosen not to get help. But I can't. But I can't bear. Um, I can't. Sorry. Um, I was afraid I didn't know whether to turn my phone off when we had trouble with the camera. I'm going to put this on silence right now. So I think I'll just turn my phone off. Hold on. Sorry. I deliberately um, sorry. So I lost the train of thought. So people can have reasons they feel so vulnerable that they don't seek help. And it often comes as a surprise when someone takes their own life and you had no idea how much they were suffering. And so it takes courage to let somebody else really know you. And if you've had traumatic experiences in your life where the people close to you have been hurtful to you, not that that which is different from causing you pain. You know, your parents go away and leave you with a sitter for a week and they go to the Bahamas, you're going to miss them. But that's not what we're talking about. When they really are abusive, and I don't mean just physically abusive, but when you've been hurt, when you feel your own sense of private shame and guilt and failure, and you don't want to make yourself vulnerable to someone else for fear you'll be hurt even further, then you get kind of trapped. And as I said, suicide is when someone feels there's no better solution. So I have real compassion for the anguish that someone has suffered with long before they took their life. I don't know if that answers your question, Will.
It answered my question where it's because the way I look at this, to be honest with you, is when I got to that dark spot, and I've lost several of my buddies to that dark spot, it's a very lonely road, like you were just naming. And I believe in my heart that if we are willing to be vulnerable and connect to a person like a psychologist, a social worker, a psychiatrist, and allowing us to be able to share a moment of space and vulnerability with somebody that's truly expect trust us or we trust them, that we could be able to unravel the emotions that are stuck in that traumatic wound, and we're not bleeding all that negativity into the rest of the relationships, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Right.
go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Well, I agree. It's not just bleeding into other relationships. It bleeds into one's sense of oneself. Um, and I mean, I'm not an expert on suicidology, but I've always believed that and I think this is because of what's unavoidable, given the differences in uh, if you're born a boy and born a girl, that men have a harder time making themselves vulnerable, developing that kind of intimate, vulnerable relationship with another person than women do. Now, that's a very broad, overgeneralized statement, but I think one of the reasons men commit suicide so much more frequently is they feel it's if you need to ask for that kind of help or you can't dig out of the hole by yourself, it's not just a failure, it's a comment on your masculinity. It's a comment on your strength. It's a comment on your competence, on your own self respect. And I think it's in an overly generalized way, men feel much more ashamed, embarrassed, challenged, frightened than do women. And so they find themselves in one of these god awful tunnels more often than do women. And then they are more hesitant to go to where the light is because they feel this such a sense of shame and failure, and as though it's a comment on their masculinity.
So how do you feel about the quote, I'd rather be in a familiar hell than an unfamiliar heaven, when it comes to people wanting to change and grow?
Um, I respect that that's what they believe, but change of any kind always has two components. It has hope that things are going to be better in whatever ways, and it has dread that they're going to be worse. So the person who says, I'd rather stay in the hell that I know than go to the heaven that's unknown or just imagined, that's because, and again, and I'm sure I'll emphasize this throughout our conversation, what's not in their awareness, it's not that they're lying to themselves consciously or lying to you if they're talking to you or lying to me, is heaven's going to be worse. I'd rather stay with the devil I know than the devil I don't. But whatever that devil is may not be very conscious, but they can say, yeah, I'm not, it's too risky. It's too risky. They say it's heaven, but who knows? So for that person, that's part of the tragedy is they can't imagine that you can even take some steps towards heaven.
Hmm.
Because once you start, you're vulnerable in a different kind of way. If you stay, you're vulnerable. But as I said, I think it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't.
How do you teach vulnerability to a person that is weary about being vulnerable?
Well, when we talk or when we think to ourselves, I don't want to make myself vulnerable. That's only half the sentence, but many people stop there. I don't want to make myself vulnerable to whom and because. Right? So I don't want to make myself vulnerable to, you can fill in, because they're going to be too frightened even to listen to what I need to talk about. Or they're going to be too horrified. Or I feel too guilty and ashamed, and even if they don't say anything, they're going to lose respect for me. And so I don't want to make myself vulnerable to another person. And usually someone who's in this kind of a place where they feel trapped, it doesn't make any difference who the person is. You could say it's a therapist. You could say it's a clergyman. You could say it's a friend or a spouse or a child. I don't dare make myself vulnerable to them because, and then the because is filled in with something that's so threatening that I'd rather stay where I am, even though I'm miserable, because this will just make me more miserable. Or I'll really frighten and overwhelm the person I need to talk to. If I'm really candid.
I remember feeling that exact thought. And then also wondering how a person could be able to relate to the stuff that we did overseas. But creating this rejection with people to not be able to see us for being humans. And when I had the privilege of working at the VA for the last 3 years, one of the lines that would be very similar to what you said is that I don't want to horrify, I don't want to over traumatize them. And what I've seen was that they were trying to protect people, but at the same time, just really unsure about how to process those emotions or let go of the past emotions for that human connection.
Yes, I have two thoughts. They do want to protect the other person from the horrors that they need to share. But they also are protecting themselves, because if the other person is so overwhelmed as to be, I'll use the word incapacitated, they can't figure out how to respond, then that just increases the trauma. Right? Just, oh my God, I've overwhelmed Joseph, and he can't even listen. He can't begin to know, and that just pours salt in the wound. And the other, there's a concept in psychoanalytic thought called the importance of witnessing, and which the listener wants to witness the horror that the person who's coming to talk to them has been through. And I'm not just talking, it can be a professional like myself, but it could be you as a colleague, or a friend. And so our ability to witness, really be present, that's what I mean by witnessing. I don't mean looking from a distance, being really present to witness it, is healing. It's healing for the person whose trauma is being known. And it's actually healing in a very paradoxical way for the person who's doing the witnessing, because you've really experienced another person's humanity and in all its anguish and horror. So, and I would just add one thing. There are some times when I might say to a patient, I can't be the person who can witness what you're going through. So, for example, if I had had a child who had died recently, and the loss of a child is probably the most traumatic loss of all, but to the degree that you can rank them at all, but it's wordlessly traumatic. If I had recently had a child of mine die and you came to see me because you were really worried that your child wasn't going to live after being in an accident or having had cancer, I would say to you, I hope I would have the courage to say to you, you need someone who can really be there for you and know as best they can what you're dealing with. But I've been through something the same that's just too raw. I'm not that person. And I don't want to re-traumatize you. So let me refer you to someone who can be there for you in the way you need to be.
It's important. It's important to be able. I'm taking this in, and that's why I'm being quiet. This is something I'm learning for my future profession, and it just resonates about if we actually put away our savior complex and we're there for the person that we are serving in the moment, we realize that we are not able to always help out everybody, but we can do our best to help them.
Yes, and the silence that you mentioned is really important. I would have been quite comfortable if you'd been quiet for a longer period of time. Um, Seems to me any meaningful conversation of something as serious and heartbreaking and traumatic that we're talking about, at times silence is the most healing and the most meaningful part of a conversation. And it can last for as long as it needs to last.
Yeah, it definitely can. And I'm not trying to rush through the motions or the emotions of it. It's something that we are, or I'm learning about in grad school right now, is about the silence and how that helps them really be witnessed, and it helps them actually be heard,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Right.
allows the emotions to actually really unravel instead of trying to grasp onto the first one that we feel and allowing the exploration behind the rest of them that is projecting that one forward.
Yes, I mean, I've actually come to think of, I mean, the metaphor that I use throughout this book is the whole sense of of metabolism. And I think it's not just when we're suffering, but particularly when we're suffering, we that we need to share it with another person in order to get something from them that allows us to metabolize it. Um, in a psychological sense, we take something in from them, we use that to metabolize the pain that we're experiencing, and that's been true since we were infants, right? You're hungry, or your diaper needs changing, or you've fallen down and you cut yourself. You need someone to be there for you, right? To listen and to respond so that you can, my word is metabolize the experience and get fed or get your diaper changed or whatever, or have the cut, so that um, that's why that's why one can only do so much on one's own. I think we're hardwired to need that.
So, what you mentioned your book and metabolizing. What was the what was the inspiration of you writing this book?
Well, it's funny. I'd written some papers before and given a number of talks. I was an English major in college. For a while, I thought about being an English professor, but I didn't really like literary criticism, and I wasn't a fiction writer. So I went ahead and became a psychiatrist and an analyst, which is something I thought I wanted to do when I went to college, although, as I said, I changed my mind for a while and came back to it. And I was not aware that I wanted to write a book, but over the course of my career, without realizing it, I'd created a bunch of short sayings that I call aphorisms. Like, I'll give you an example. Somebody who acts violently believes they have been violated. Or, the best medication is a good doctor-patient relationship. Or, someone's behavior seems irrational because we don't understand their rationale. And so I had two students that I was teaching. They were becoming psychoanalysts, and one faculty member with me who was a writer. And they said, "You have this way of saying things, you ought to write a book." And that tipped the scale. And I started collecting all these aphorisms. Collecting, meaning if I came up with one when I was talking to a patient or talking to a student or talking to someone in supervision, I'd jot it down. And I got this whole list of them. And then I just organized them, and the book was really waiting to be written. And I think for my own private reasons, which I've come to understand, I didn't want to take a chance to write it. When you write something, you're really vulnerable. It's right out there. There's nowhere to hide. I've written what I've written, and I can't take it back. And so there's real vulnerability in writing, at least writing for the public. But the book was waiting to be written, and these were things that I'd synthesized and understood over 50 years of working in many areas of mental health. And I believed I had something to say and could say it in a way that anybody who was interested could understand, including my senior colleagues.
Listening for a Lifetime, The Artful Science of Psychotherapy. And when you wrote this book, you said about being vulnerable. What was some of the reflections from your colleagues and other individuals that read the book? What kind of feedback have you received?
Well, the feedback has been really very gratifying. That in the sense that I think the most gratifying is not that people agree with my ideas, although they have agreed with, but they really appreciate how I wrote it. So that's coming from, I had dinner last night with an attorney friend of mine who's about as psychologically minded as a post, at least in terms of what he lets on. But he said he got a huge amount out of my book. And so what's been most gratifying is that I've written it in a way that these concepts mean something to my colleagues, but they meant something to my friend who's not a psychologically minded guy and is pretty closed off. So I think that was the most gratifying. I think I also learned a great deal about myself in writing it. When you sit down and put your ideas into words and put it on a page, at least for me, it's a slightly altered state of consciousness, and you discover things about yourself when you start to write. So I learned a lot about what I believe and about myself as a person and a psychoanalyst.
What was the most difficult chapter to write, and why?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think what I would say is not what was the most difficult chapter. The most difficult issue that runs throughout the book is, how personal do I want to be? How much of my private personal self do I want to share with the reader? Some would be readers I know, some would be readers I don't. Some would be readers I teach with, some would be patients of mine. So it was important to me that I share enough of myself that a reader would really feel, well, I've got a sense of who this guy is. At the same time, I wanted to keep aspects of myself private. And that's, you know, that gets back to what we talked about earlier. On the one hand, you want to be deeply immersed with another person. That may have been something we were talking about before we went on air. And at the same time, you want to be separate from people. So I think that was the most difficult and challenging, you know. And that was throughout the whole book.
So after completing that book, or your book that you have released, what was also like, I know you talked about retiring from your practice after doing it for about 55 years. What is like, what is the things that keep inspiring you, keep going? Because you said you're 83 years old. What keeps you moving forward?
I wish I were 83. I'm going to be
Sorry.
80. I'm going to be 85 in a couple of months. I appreciate you giving me 2 years back. I'd like them. I'd like them. I mean, I can still play tennis, and I'm pretty active, so I'm very lucky for a man my age. Um, but your question was, um,
What keeps you moving forward?
so what keeps me moving forward is I'm not just counting the days until I die. I think that when you get to my age, if you spend your life and your life is dominated by the fact that you're going to die soon, um, then you're not growing. Then life is simply about withering. And I think what keeps me going is there are things that I want to continue to create that are new for me. This kind of conversation being one of them. But there are other things where I want to do something new and something that's growing. At the same time, I know that I'm going to be 85 and I could die tomorrow, and we are cleaning out stuff in our attic because we don't want to leave all that for our children, and that's a way of accepting the reality of death, but not have it dominate your life. And I would just add, there's no way to prepare for it because you don't know what it's like until you get to that age where you're aware of death in a different way.
Have you grieved your immortality complex?
That's a really good question. Freud said way back that we can never imagine our own death, um, and that's clearly true for children. A child doesn't really understand what death is. Um, I'm not a child psychiatrist or a child analyst. I do know something about child development, and a child doesn't really understand death until 6, 7, 8. Then death takes on a different kind of meaning. They may give the impression that they understand death, but it's a very it's a very challenging concept. So at what point does death take on a different meaning? Did it for me? I can't tell you a time, but there was some way when I was just aware. The way I think about it is, at some point I had the thought, I don't have as long to live as I want to. That's not something I thought in my 50s or my 60s. Even though I'd had a very close friend who died in his early 70s. In a personal way, that didn't come to me until sometime in my 70s.
So the reason I ask you this question is that different grieving different identities from retirement to death. I had the privilege of being part of an existential psychology cohort in the first few months at my old job, and it was individuals typically from Vietnam and Korea vets, and we talked about Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, about how we are looking at the end of a life where we can hang our heads high, we can go down fighting, or we can just give up. And then another one was referenced was Yalms staring into the sun, where, go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to say anything.
I think it's an important question that people to think about sometimes in their life where you're from what I picked up from our conversation before and while we're actually on the air is that continuously growing, we're not wilting. Living with purpose is and living intentional is making life being able to continue to move forward. At the same time of cleaning out your attic, you're thinking about what's post you and your wife. And I appreciate it. It's just it's an interesting way to think. And as a person that is wanting to understand more of the human experience, and I think this type of conversation will help people in the future and then also even in the present for some people.
Well, I hope so. It would be a privilege. It's a privilege for me to talk to you. I mean, this kind of a discussion where others can listen and participate. As I say, it's a real privilege. It was a privilege to be a physician throughout my life, and as well as being a psychiatrist. And as I said, I miss my profession of my practice. Um, I realized after I stopped that the practice of, particularly the practice of being a psychoanalyst, where you really get to know people very well, but but you also come to know yourself in a way that you can't other ways. Because I have a one of my aphorisms is if you think about your mind as a harp over the course of your career, your patients will pluck every string in the harp of your mind, including lots that you didn't know were there and some that you wish weren't there. And so um, I think that continuing to do new things, that's what growth is about. And I mean, I would like to think that I'm growing in the way I'm metabolizing, since that's the word I liked, the metaphor that I liked, how I'm metabolizing the prospect of my death, whatever that means. I mean, in lots of, and a great deal, it's wordless.
Well, I will definitely tell you, I have taken a lot from this conversation and the growth. And I kept thinking about Dr. Carol Dweck and Mindset, the book that she wrote. I was
That's
thinking
one
about,
I don't know. Yeah, I was when I mean Yalom and Frankel. I mean Yalom's a marvelous writer. He's very straight and Victor, very straightforward and very readable, and yet very serious.
mhm.
And Man's Search for Meaning is how do you how do you find meaning in a world that seems intent on destroying meaning? So you pick two authors that are deeply resonant with me.
So Dr. Carol Dweck, she wrote the book Mindset, and it goes off of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And how people can continue to go a lot further with a growth mindset, even if they have had really natural talent, where people have the perseverance to go and fail forward and continuously grow. And another one I was thinking about was Brene Brown, where she spoke about there's no acts of courage without vulnerability. And I go ahead.
No, no, I wasn't going to say. I was just nodding in agreement.
And when I think about the future of how life looks like, you have to be vulnerable with yourself and also with the experiences that you're taking to grow. Because we talked about vulnerability in a multitude of ways.
Yeah, multitude of ways. Um, I also think it because you raised the question about why people we're talking about suicide, about why somebody may not go talk to anybody. If you're afraid that you're going to tap into the other person's vulnerability, that may make the situation worse. And so it's one of the things that can hold people back. So the question is both your vulnerability and how and your trusting that you're assessing the person you're talking to, that he or she can really wants to know who you are, including the things that are just overwhelming to you. And yet you make the assessment that they will do, and what I think about is a good enough job. It's not a perfect job. There's nothing close to it. I've never been close to perfect in any professional or personal relationship I've ever had. Um, but being good enough and and owning one's own shortcomings as a therapist, as a friend, as a father, as a husband, that contributes to the healing. It's not about being perfect or anything close to it.
Hmm. That's what my a thesis I'm going to eventually write on is about connecting with people and actually not being perfect, but growing with people is a way to be able to learn vulnerability. And I believe if we were able to role model, there was something you talked about with boys struggling and having difficulties. I had the privilege of talking to the social worker that used to be a teacher, and we were discussing about how boys at a young age, when they get angry or frustrated, they're pretty much told to knock it off. And instead of being investigating about what emotions that they're feeling, and it really sets the stone for life, or at least that is a belief that I have.
Uh, I think that that teacher's right. We're much more likely to view angry little boys either being bad or aggressive in some global way. Because in some ways, I think even as a child, the child is much more threatening, whereas a little girl who gets angry, and it's also a problem for girls, by the way, and women, that somehow it's as though they can't get as angry as we men. Um, and while I do think that testosterone and brain development it's not the same, obviously, for men and women. Do women get as angry as men? I believe so. Do they manage it differently? I think for neurobiological as well as sociocultural reasons, I would say yes. But you're right. Angry little boys are viewed as they're going to become monsters. And in fact, little girls can be as privately as angry monsters as little boys.
Hmm. So, Dr. Joseph, I usually keep the interview for about an hour, and I was wondering what is some thoughts that you would like to share, and then also where could people be able to find your book and also find you?
Um, well, I don't. My book is available. You can either your local bookstore can order it. It's published by Mission Point Press, and they can order it. You can also get it through Amazon, and Amazon has the ebook. And the title of the book, which Will mentioned before, is "Listening for a Lifetime: The Artful Science of Psychotherapy." And should any of you get the book and read it, and I'm quite serious about this, I'd like to know what impact it has. I mean, whether, and particularly, whether it was something that was understandable and meaningful to you. I think that's the most important thing. And if you felt like writing, it's fine. They can get in touch with me. My email address is dijoseph3518 @gmail. I got hacked, and so I made an email address that I thought was harder, which was really stupid. I should have made a simple one. It should have just been dij@gmail.com. But it's not, and it's too big a pain in the neck to change it.
Well, there's a way that you can do it where you can start phasing one out and then also entering the new one. If you ever are interested, I would walk you through it. But
At my age, I'm just going to live with it. Doesn't bother me that much. It's just 4 extra numbers.
And then what is the message that you would give to any listeners that might be curious about being vulnerable or actually working on their mental health?
I think if I was going to I think what's most important, I think, in what I believe about my career, about my work, about my profession, about human relationships, is that we all need to be listened to. And that's true, as you and I were talking about earlier in our conversation. As infants, and for many years, we need another adult to listen to us, to know what we need. That's something every human being experiences for a long time, long before we can ask for what we need using words, right? And so we need to be listened to. And isolating oneself, you're cutting yourself off from something you need. And I think we need it differently. I think we're, quote, hardwired. Some of us need it more than others. Some people are much more private, and they're born that way. And some people are much more emotionally intense from birth. So it's not like we're all the same, but we all need to be listened to and given to by someone who really has our interest at heart. And so I would accept that and really respect that. That's part of being human. And when you need to and want to talk to somebody, the trick is to find somebody who's earned your trust. And if you're going to see a professional and you don't know that person, you see, well, they don't know you. Does this person you're going to see, are they earning your trust? And if they are, then you can make yourself more vulnerable, and that process will go on throughout your time with them. And that's true in any ongoing relationship, whether it's a marital relationship, a friendship, a professional relationship. So I would say respect the fact that we need to be listened to, and we want to be listened to, and we want to be known, and yet it's risky to be known, let oneself be known to another. It's also risky to come to know yourself fully. We all hide stuff from ourselves. That's part of the way our minds work, right? I think about it in terms of evolution. Animals avoid pain, right? So if you feel really sad, it's human nature to want to hide it, right? It's evolution. You stay away from pain. So psychotherapy is getting to know oneself, which is what psychotherapy is about. It's really hard work. It takes a lot of courage, and you shouldn't underestimate it. It's worth it, but it's hard work.
I so believe in that. And Dr. Joseph, I appreciate your time. I've taken a lot from this conversation, and I would love to talk to you again.
If you would like to, I would be happy to. I've enjoyed our conversation too. It was particularly good because we didn't plan what we were going to talk about. We just let a conversation go the way you and I wanted it to go. So I've enjoyed it. And I hope your listeners have too.
I'm pretty sure, and if you're interested, so somebody wrote this. Absolutely, mental health is the number one complaint. She works for the vet center over here in Billings. It comes with quality of life, but no one wants to go pay for it and help or take the time off or inconvenience their time. It's supposed to be instant, but real change takes time, takes sacrifice, and takes accountability. We have an accountability epidemic. I have these problems and they excuse my poor behavior. It's not my fault because I'm hurt. And as long as that's the prevailing mindset, people will not grow and heal. Even once they have the tools and they know what to do, they don't do it because it's more comfortable to stay in the pain they know.
Well, yes, I agree with her. It's more comfortable to stay in the pain they know because they're so afraid that the pain they encounter will be worse. And it won't be that the relationship with whoever they're talking with, whether it's the person who wrote this or whether it's talking to you or whoever, that it's going to be pouring salt in the wounds. So if you come with that expectation, you're going to be very, very hesitant. And the hardest thing, at least for me, is to have someone come to talk to me who's really hurting, but they're terrified to let me earn their trust at all. And that's the tragic position, is they can't make themselves vulnerable enough for me to earn their trust. And yet if they don't make themselves vulnerable, they're going to be trapped in their misery forever.
That is the duality of really being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much.
It's been a privilege. And as I said, if you'd like to talk again,